Hello and welcome to our webinar entitled Identifying Retention Risk Before It's Too Late, How to Strengthen Retention Strategies and Increase ROI. My name is Jonathan Webster, and I will serve as your host for this online event today. First and foremost, I want to just say thank you to everyone for joining us. A couple of quick orders of business here. First, during the webinar, everyone will be muted so we can get a clean and clear recording to share with you later. Second, during the webinar, if you have any questions, please use the chat icon to talk with us. It looks like a little cartoon speech bubble. And you can choose to send direct messages to me, or you can send messages to everyone. There's a little drop down there where you can select who you're sending messages to. And with that, now I have the privilege of introducing our People Analytics webinar presenter, CEO and co-founder of TrenData, Mr. Tom McEwen.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you everybody for showing up today, Thursday morning. This is our first webinar of the new year. Happy New Year to you all. We thought we'd start this one off kind of going back to a familiar theme, but of retention, and particularly high performer retention. And we've got a batch of new statistics out and stuff from the BLS, which I'll share with everybody. But let me first go over agenda, what we're going to cover today. So first off, I'll give, I see a lot of familiar faces or names today, so thank you for coming to another one of our webinars. But I'll tell, just for those who are joining the first time, just a little bit about TrenData, who we are. Then I'll, as I often start off these webinars, talk a little about some industry data, particularly in this situation as to why people leave companies and why people stay with companies. Then we'll look in at some recommended best practices that some companies have employed to try and keep their their good performers around and improve the tenure of their best people. And we're going to kind of meld that in towards the end to the technology that People Analytics can provide to help you keep people around, and particularly identifying, not only the the people, who's possibly at risk of leaving, but particularly, your high performers who might be in that dangerous position who you don't want to lose. So we'll talk a little bit like that, and that'll bring us in towards the end. We'll do kind of a targeted demonstration of TrenData and some of our visualization and predictive analytics to show how that can be a very helpful tool in keeping your high performers. As Jonathan mentioned, at the end, we'll break for questions. In the meantime, as we're going through the presentation, if you think of something that you want to ask about, just send a chat to him, and he will keep them all queued up, and we'll make sure we get to all of them at the end. So let's get into it. So first off, a little bit about TrenData. We are, in this virtual world, I start to wonder if it makes a difference where anybody's located anymore. But just for a point of view, we're headquartered in Richardson, Texas, which is a little north of Dallas. We've been around since 2017. We sell mostly to corporate clients, but really any kind of organization that has a workforce. That could be nonprofits, education, government, healthcare, whatever. And our solution for People Analytics is AI driven, and it's a cloud SaaS offering. So it's a type of application you just need a browser to be able to access, no infrastructure needed on your part. Just to highlight some of our customers, we have customers as small as, we signed a couple up this year that only had 70 employees, and we have others that go up to the almost 100,000 employees, and everywhere in between. And as you can see from just the few customers I've highlighted here, we're pretty much well represented in most industries. So, if you're thinking of going with TrenData and you want to talk to one of our clients, we're a pretty good shot. We can hook you up with one that is in a similar field to yourselves. All right, so let's get into it. I always have a tough time getting up to date job and turnover data, and I always find that the best place to actually go for that as current as possible is always the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They just recently put out a short report. You can always go to their site, bls.gov, which is as current as you want. But I saw a report that came out, and I actually plucked some of the information out of it. And the reason I left this URL up here down at the bottom is I wanted to send it to everybody. It's a PDF you can download from the web that gives you a lot of this. I just plucked out a portion of that information that I'm going to review here. So this, they kind of do summary statistics every 6 months in November and May. The graph over to the left, it's a little blurry because I cut it right out of the report, but the graph over to the left shows kind of job openings. And as you can see, things are doing pretty well until kind of, we hit that big pandemic drop back in the spring of last year. And as you can see, moving to the right, which is more in line with what we're going to cover today, this is a graph which talks about hires and separations at companies. And you can see they're remarkably close in people leaving or getting let go from companies to the amount of people that are getting hired. Of course, then you get over here to May 2020, and a lot of people got let go during that initial pandemic scare. And you can see the hires, which is the blue line, came back a little, but you see there's a pretty big delta still out there as to people that are unemployed. And now things have kind of settled back almost to a familiar pattern. If you kind of highlight the some of the figures in this report, it's basically breaking down monthly turnover in the U.S. labor force at about 3.6% a month, and that's about 2.2% of what they call quits, which is essentially voluntary turnover, versus 1.4%, which are people who are let go from companies. And the reason I point that out is if you go back all the way on this particular graph, and I zoom in on this one, I couldn't find any data immediately for 2018, but in 2019, before the pandemic, it's remarkably close to what it's getting back to now. It was about 2.3% and 1.2%. So what you can see is essentially, particularly during normal times, is about 2/3 of turnover is voluntary turnover, people leaving organizations on their own, and that's the kind of turnover that companies really want to fight, because generally, if somebody's leaving on their own, it's somebody you, for the most part, probably didn't care to let go, and is probably a valued employee that you maybe would have wanted to retain. So let's dive into that a little bit. Talk a little bit about all the studies out there that talk about why people leave their company. There's kind of ones that jump out that are in every study, and I kind of call them the usual suspects. They do say people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So that's often cited as a reason people leave their companies. Compensation is always very, very high on the list, as is work-life balance. So any study you'll see out there that looks at turnover will see these three pop up. Generally, they're the top three. Very minimally, there'll be the three in the top five. I use the frame usual suspects. It references one of my favorite movies over here on the right. And if you want to chat to Jonathan Webster, if you know the name of that movie, we're going to give a $25 gift card to the first two people who can chat the name of that movie to Jonathan. And also, if you don't get in on that first part, we'll give a $25 gift card to anybody who can name any two of the actors or actress in that shot right there. You can't win twice, so if you want to go ahead and shoot your answers into Jonathan, I think the first one's pretty easy. If you can name a few of those actors and actresses, you have to get two though, as you see in there, so to get the money. So, but getting back to the content of the webinar, These are the things that show up a lot. But what came out a few years ago, Harvard Business Review kind of did a little bit of a deeper study to find out, why do people stay at their job? And they came out with some things which I say you dig a little deeper and you get to some of the real things that people like. And it talks about, number one is that people find their work enjoyable. If you get up and, work is work, but if you enjoy what you're doing, going to your job every day and dive into um, your job, that's a big factor, in keeping people at their work. Also, be if you feel that in your job you're using your strengths. Um, any of you remember back when you got out of college, or whenever you went to work? I had a computer science degree, and my first job I was selling word processing software. And I'm like, is this what I went to 4 years of college for? But it eventually got me to where I wanted to go in my career. But I'm sure we've all asked ourselves that question, particularly in those entry level jobs, as to am I really doing what I'm best at in my job here, what I studied for? And then the third one, which often pops up, is are you getting skills you needed to advance your career? So you may be doing a job that you may not think is one of those first two, but if you think it's getting you the type of training and experience you need to get to what you want to do long term in a career, then you might stick it out for the first two. And if you get all three, that's kind of the home run. But getting to finding out whether people are one of these three categories requires a lot of effort by the employers sometimes. So let's look at maybe some tips as to how you can maybe increase retention in a lot of these areas. One thing I always talk about is it starts at the very beginning with recruiting. This is a statistic from tlnt.com, talent organization. They produce Talent Magazine as well. But I find this stat in a lot of different areas that 33% of people quit after 6 months in their job. There's a lot of factors that go into that. A lot of times you start a job and realize it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. A lot of times people accept jobs to have a job while they're still looking. So that's something you got to try and smoke out in the interview process. But a lot of ways to get it, at least the first one, is to make sure you're very clear in the description of the job and how it's represented through the interview process. A lot of times what's going to be done in a job is not clear, and that causes people to get into jobs and realize, this isn't really what I wanted to do. So emphasizing that clearly throughout the recruiting and hiring process is very important. Also, being able to identify areas where you get your best hires. Are they coming through employee referrals, or is it through LinkedIn, through job boards? Being able to find, because usually what you find, if you find somewhere you're getting a good stream of candidates, it tends to be consistent, and you like to turn your resources, because nobody has endless recruiting, to those resources to find out how can I increase my flow of candidates from this particular avenue to get more high-performing and tenured employees on board. And then there's just one of those rules that goes in life is, make a good first impression when people join the company. Don't make it a share or a scare or a shock scene when people come on. You want to make them feel like they've joined somewhere good, and that the company's got a clear mission and the people are decent to each other. I always remember when I first started at Adobe Systems way back in the 90s. I was single at the time, but when I got hired, they wanted to send a dozen roses to my wife, and I told them I was single. I thought they had that information, but then when they recovered and realized that I was single, they sent them to my mother. So I thought that was a great opening salvo. And they also said if I had been a woman, they would have sent a similar type of care basket to my to a husband. So it was a great first impression of the company when I got there, and it tended to be very indicative of how they treated people and how it was to work there. So recruiting is get good people in the door and make them give that good first impression of your company. Now, once people are around, there's a number of things that look for. I talked a little bit about this and why people stay, but training and advancement are very high on people's lists of why they go to work somewhere. I pulled that 80% view this as a top benefit, said Mercer, but World at Work, all the other stats put that very high as well. And from an employer standpoint, it just makes total sense. You want to invest in people that you've already got who know the culture, who know how things work, rather than going out and recruiting someone who you're going to have to teach all that to, and also take a chance on whether they're going to blend or not. They're going to be the right fit for the company. Also promoting people from within. It's always kind of a little dispiriting when you're at a company where it seems like every top level position is recruited from the outside. One, it puts a little shiver of fear throughout the organization that, okay, well, we've got a new person coming in who's going to have their new way of doing things, and also the thought that this person's going to bring all of his former people with him and start populating all the other management type jobs. So being able to promote from within says a lot about a company, and the idea that you make that part of your culture. They always rank companies on those best companies to work for lists. A big factor is always, where do they get their management from? Now, like most organizations, or whether it's sports teams or companies or whatever, often you have to augment the organization with the occasional outside trade. But if you can make it so that people feel that they work hard, they succeed, that they get ahead, and make that as part of your culture, that's a really big benefit to being able to retain and keep valued employees. Compensation, as I mentioned before, is often a very top factor. World at Work does their study every year, and compensation really is always number one or two, and I think it's probably one most of the time. But there's certain things about compensation to be aware of. First of all, you can have a very happy employee that you have no idea, or yet you don't think is in the world you'd lose that employee, and then they get an offer from outside the company that's a lot more than they're making there, or they go out and scan the internet and find out what their position is worth. So it's often something that's an outside influence that could come in to a really happy employee. And you might be a small to medium-sized company, you might be a large company, but if you don't know what companies are paying for the type of positions you have in-house, it definitely puts you at a disadvantage. So one strategy to to keep abreast of this is to constantly be benchmarking your salaries versus what the positions are that are in the industry. Now, sometimes you can't always match. If you're a startup or a small to mid-sized company, you may not be able to match what Visa, Bank of America, IBM are going to be giving as far as compensation and benefits. But knowing what those companies are offering also gives you the chance to make it up in other areas. You might be a startup, you can't pay high salaries, but if you're paying stock, if you're giving stock options, or again, playing up the fact that you promote people, can offset some of these things that you might not be able to do compensation-wise. But the first key is to know what's out there. You have to know what you don't know to be able to keep people. So key, I highly recommend benchmarking your compensation. And then again, just the cost of losing, particularly a high performer or a high potential employee. You've probably seen numerous studies. I put some of them in my webinars, But you lose a really good employee. First off, you have to go out and replace them, either internally. Hopefully, you've got a good succession plan. But if you don't, then you have to go out and replace them externally. You got the time it takes to put someone in that position. You've got the time it takes to train them. And then you've got the uncertainty of whether they're going to make it, or whether they're going to get be as good as the person who was there before them. So it's a lot easier to keep people than to replace them. And another thing that kind of goes along with this line is the transparency and communications. Some of you may be old enough to remember when companies didn't even post open positions. You had no idea there was another job within the company that you could go to. But things like, here's a stat from a Harris poll a while back that said 91% of employees don't think their boss knows how to communicate well. Whether it's true or not, it's basically true if the employees believe that. So being able to communicate with your employees, first of all, do you have regular all company meetings, or at least if you're huge, all department or all division meetings where you're constantly being able to put information out to the company. And you find employees are understanding of things if they know about them. If maybe sales were down last quarter, or you are going to bring in a new VP of sales or something. If people know about that in advance, they're much more able to deal with it. And companies love hearing from the executives of what they're doing. One company I worked with, it was a big company. It was about $300 million company. And at our company meetings, the executive would actually go through bulleting the finances of the company and the cost of the initiatives he was using to move us forward. And as far as just being training you on how a company runs, I found that very valuable. But other things, open door policies, the fact that you can go in and talk to your boss anytime you want, and that you feel comfortable doing it. Sometimes, a manager, a high-ranking executive needs to solicit from other people in the organization, are people afraid to come in and talk to me? You're not usually the best judge of that if you're the executive. And that often falls to HR, being able to, marshal that opinion, go talk to that manager and say, it's no reflection on the job you're doing, but your people are afraid to come in and talk to you. And, those are things you might need to change. Another factor that's come out, which I'm starting to see a lot more used, is you've heard of the concept of an exit interview. When somebody leaves, you ask them all the questions, why they left and all that. A lot more companies now are starting to practice stay interviews. So they're interviewing their happy employees, their employees who've been there for a while, finding what are the reasons they are, why they're staying, and also if they're thinking of leaving or what might make them leave. And you can do these anonymously, or as long as the employee is willing to do it. As many of these you can do can really shore up what it is that's best to your company, and make you push it more and get rid of the things that aren't working. The last one I wanted to go in, which will kind of lead a little into the demonstration portion, is being able to use data and technology. I've got an example over to the right, which is TrenData, but being able to visualize and see just even the very most basic workforce stats in your organization. How many people do you have? What's the revenue per employee? How long does it take to hire somebody? The generally figures people don't have at their fingertips, and 91% of companies actually use spreadsheets in a survey that was taken in 2019 by SHRM to do most of this. I always kind of refer to spreadsheets as kind of like the technology cockroach, and that they're just never going to go away. But the more of this information that you can take off and put onto systems that are more dynamic, readily available, and more graphically informative, goes a long way in just being able to get a pulse on your organization. But then you go to the further step is, then you can do a lot with that data. There's been a lot of advancements in AI and machine learning that can allow you to use the data, identify key factors, projections, and actually predict into the future things like, who's going to leave, or what's top line turnover, high performer turnover, things going to look like, and give you the factors that are actually going to uh, affect that, and maybe where you can adjust the knobs a little bit to show you what you can do to keep people around. Kind of give you an idea. Um, you could have just very basic information on your employees, maybe just their date of birth, how long they've been with the company, how much they're making. You can actually get a pretty accurate model just using those three factors, as to using some history to determine who might be leaving the company. But most companies I've found, particularly most companies of any size, actually have much more data than that. You probably have data on not only tenure, how long people have been there, how long they've been in their current position. What was the last raise they got? What are people's career goals? How long does it take them to get to work? Do they like working from home? The more factors you can have, the much more effective your data visualization and prediction can be. And really what's key on top of that is how far back the data you have. I'll show you in a little bit, but with TrenData, generally, if we can get 3 years of data and 4 or 5 of the key factors we're looking for, we can be like 80+% accurate in predicting what your turnover is going to be and what can actually be done to make it go in the right direction. And I'll kind of talk a little bit about how this is done in the demonstration, which I'll kind of move into right now. So if I hit escape here, you should be able to see a dashboard. So this is the TrenData solution. We can bring in data and make any number of dashboards. We're going to focus in pretty much on retention for this one. But just being able to see information on your screen that can give you just high level points. What is turnover? What's turnover rate of first year for employees that have been with the company less than a year? Look side by side to what's the revenue per employee next to the average salary of a terminated employee. And then get even a little more detailed and see which managers have the highest turnover rate. Where are you hiring from, where people are leaving most often, engagement scores, main reason for leaving. And then trending, which is really the key to analytics, is not the snapshot in time. What you're seeing here is as of today, these are all the statistics. But how have things been trending over time? And as you can see in this particular view, turnover is actually been on the rise. And I can actually drill down on that and take a look at it in a little bit more detail. For example, you can see that this particular view is showing a rolling 12 of the last 12 months in the organization. If I wanted to look at another time period, for example, if I wanted to go back a couple of years, I can do that. I can look at it by quarters, or I can, just keep it where I want it and look at it a little differently. So this is showing me turnover in total, but what if I wanted to look at it maybe by job level? Okay, it shows me turnover amongst executives versus staff. I can also look at it, for example, by separation type. So who's leaving voluntarily and who's leaving involuntarily. And as you can see, I've got a very high amount of voluntary turnover here, which is possibly what's causing the concern. If you want to look at maybe just kind of a snap comparison, you can actually put a events overlay above, which will show you maybe some things that have happened during that time period and was something driving this turnover. But the real key is, this is what's happening now. What's going to happen in the future? For example, if I wanted to see 6 months out, what is the system telling me is going to happen with turnover? So if I click on the predictive button, it now gives me a view that shows these last 6 months where turnover was spiking up and then came down a little bit. And looks like that trend downward is going to continue to some extent. But if you look at turnover for January, it's still 3.65%, which if you annualize that gives you an annual turnover rate of about 40%. So that might be higher than you're wanting it. So along with the trend, we also give you an analysis where you can find out, some of the things that are actually affecting turnover. This shows that salary is probably, you would think it'd be higher, but it's actually a lower reason in this particular scenario. Letting employees work remotely has a moderate effect. We'll test all these in a minute. It's also telling us that professional development, particularly amongst high performers, has a high effect. So similar to some of the things we were looking at in the slides. But what we can do with the solution is actually model it and see what moves things in the right direction. So for example, if I move from this individual employee view and take a look at the modeling, I can see what would happen if I change one of these three factors. So for example, right here it's saying salary has a low effect. Right now, the average salary across the whole organization is about $85,000 a year. If I were to change that to say $90,000, turnover went down 0.2 of 1%. Maybe that's a good movement. But if you just gave $5,000 to everybody in a 1,000-person company, you just spent $5 million, and you really didn't get a big movement of that. So you might want to debate whether that's the best place to spend that money. If you decide not, you can always back that out and see some of these other factors. Now, if you go down to the next row, we're looking at how many of the employees are working remote. So this is a very high number at this company, about 70%. Perhaps they upped it when, like most companies did, when the pandemic took root. But suppose you forecast out a little bit in the future, and maybe in April you think the vaccination's working and everybody's kind of out of the risk area, and you might want to start pulling people back into the office. Well, what if we go back to our pre-COVID levels of remote work, which might have been 35%? You can see that that's going to cause some attrition. It's going to spike up, and some people who are going to leave that who wouldn't previously leave. Probably people got to like working from home. Now you can adjust this if you want, or you can drill down a little deeper and look at performance. So high performers, which are the people we were kind of looking at as to how do you reduce turnover amongst them, and you can see that there's kind of a mixture of high performing and low performing employees that are going to be in this batch that would leave. So maybe you're not as concerned about your non-high performers leaving the company, but you sure would like to get this one down, your high performers. You don't want that going up. So that's where he brings you to this last statistic, which talks about professional development. So down here, you can see, despite the fact that it's very valued amongst high performers, professional development, we've got less than 7% of our high performers are in professional development. So what I could do is maybe take some of that money I was going to use on salaries and put it here, maybe increase that to say 20%. And you can see what that does. That drives the high performer turnover rate down even below where it was at the beginning of this stretch here, and is now down below 1%. So, that's just some of the things you can do with the system. You can build this out to have more factors involved. And you can also push the time period out if you want to look more than 6 months ahead. Now, you can also do some investigation, why maybe did compensation not get you to where you were looking to go. And if you have a compensation metric, you can see, basically it shows maybe, basically showing that the company is paying a little bit better on average than the industry salary benchmarking that we have going on here. I could drill down on that if I want to look at it through a couple of different areas. This is the total view, but if I wanted to maybe look at it across, maybe my various job levels in the organization, see if that holds true. And it does. Looks like just about everybody is paid a little bit better. If you want to do some compliance checks also, you can check, see if your gender equity program is working well. And it looks like in both areas, both male and female, you are paying above the industry averages by a similar amount. You can always dive down deeper on that if you want. For example, if I wanted to look at maybe job level here, but look at maybe just females at the various levels within the company. Is that a consistent view? And it looks like it is. So it looks like pretty much at every view I'm paying my my female employees, whether executives or staff, at or above the industry averages. So that's good for our company. So if I go back to the retention dashboard, just a couple other things you can point out. Nice thing about the system, in addition to the great graphic visualization and the predictive, is we are also voice operated. So you can actually talk to the system, or whether it's at your desktop, or we do offer the system. Right now it is device independent, so you can render it on a tablet or a smartphone, but we're actually coming out with an app in 2 months, which will really make it dynamic. And it takes a lot of use of our natural language capability. So down here you can see I've had a bot that's been standing by waiting for me if I wanted to ask any questions. So for example, I might want to say, Monica, how many vice presidents do I have in the USA?
Female 11, male 8.
See, and it even breaks it down for me. You can ask certain things like, how many vice presidents, Monica, how many vice presidents do I have in the USA that speak Spanish?
This is an empty chart.
Okay, so I have no Americans who speak Spanish in vice president. So maybe that's something I need to staff up on. So finally, before I move on to anything else, I would point out that we're very flexible in what data sources we connect with. So basically any of your HR data sources, whether it's an HRIS, recruiting or whatever, we can connect to it and bring data in. And we can also bring in multiple data sources if you have your data spread off a couple. So all very flexible, but didn't want to get too salesy in this. So I'm going to go back to the presentation and move on to questions. And while I'm soliciting questions, I want to point out that we record every one of the webinars. So if you go to our resources page, you can find a webinar tab. It'll always tell you what our next webinar coming up is, and all the past ones are recorded. And also on the resource page, we have little videos, case studies, stuff like that you can use. So with that point, Jonathan, did we get any questions?
Yes, sir, we did.
Okay.
So you sort of touched on these after the questions were asked, but let's go ahead and be thorough. First of all, as you just said, yes, of course, we'll publish the webinar to the site. We'll let you know when we do that as well in an email. And I'm happy to send the webinar slide deck to anyone else that would like it, other than the person who already requested it. So here we go. Here's the question. Couple of questions actually. Could you please expand on some of your data science team details? Specifically, what help, if any, do you provide with respect to data that we should be capturing in order to get the most out of this TrenData?
Yeah, so essentially the way the system initially works is we put all your data into the system. And if you've got a good breadth of metrics and some a decent history, like I say, a couple of years back, the system automatically starts building out algorithms and projecting patterns based on what the data is producing. So, for example, if you're a software company and you have developers maybe in San Jose or and Omaha, you would think you've got their equal ability, equal pay, equal certifications. Chances are the data is going to tell you that the ones in San Jose are a bigger retention risk because there's more opportunity there, and the data will probably show that more have turned over there just because they get solicited more often. So first off, we take the data in, and it produces all sorts of algorithms and stuff. But we do a engagement with the client because after they see the predictions and the data, and they may want to put more influence into it, we do a consulting engagement where we find out maybe a few more things. Is your business seasonal, or are you high growth? Did you just get in a big funding round, or things like that? Things that might make your today's snapshot a little different than a couple of years ago. No time period is exactly the same. So, the data that you get historical, you sometimes need some, peppering with modern facts to make it more accurate.
Absolutely. Great answer. So the next question is, what kind of platform do you use to gather all these data sets and AI insights?
Yeah, so we're a cloud-based platform. We do a we actually are on Amazon. So we basically build connectors to all of your data sources and bring them onto our platform. We have an aggregator which will bring all the data in and make sure that it's hierarched correctly, particularly if you have maybe multiple sources that have a different ID, employee ID or something, which one's going to take precedence in the system. But we're able to do that. We bring it all in, and then it goes into the system. And once it's in there, automatically an out-of-the-box group of 20 metrics are developed, and we can build more onto that based on what everybody wants to, based on what the client wants as to additional metrics. But it's our platform. We bring the data in, and it's very configurable and expandable.
Okay, and I see everyone's messages coming in individually and to everyone who are requesting the slide deck. I've noted those, and I will definitely send those to you after the webinar. Next question, what data items do you recommend to collect to achieve the best results?
Yeah, it's a good one. The more, the better, definitely. We have a kind of a list of initial required fields, name, hire date, termination date, compensation, if you can get benchmarked data, how often the person has been promoted, how long they've been in their current position. But generally, the more data you can provide, the better. Because we can build out, a much better employee scoring based on the more data points we have. You saw the model I showed had three different factors that we use. We have clients that'll have 8 or 10 there, and that enables the predictor to get that much more accurate. So we actually have a list of our standard about 55 fields that we recommend at a minimum clients put in, and about 15 to 20 of them are mandatory fields that we really need at least those, and we can actually send that out as well.
Nice. Okay, here's one. Do you use any reference data in your analytics? For example, cost of labor in a geographic area, unemployment in an area, etc.?
Yeah, so we've got a couple of partners that actually provide data down to for recruiting purposes down to a geographic specialty as to what's the availability of finance accountants who have experience in mergers and acquisitions located in Atlanta, Georgia. So we've actually got a couple of partners that have some nice stuff with that. What we were trying to find is particularly things like in retention and turnover. All the data we find tends to be at a top level. Maybe it's broken down by industry, but there aren't a lot of turnover statistics that get that granular. So we're actually building that out ourselves. We're hoping to have an offering in about 6 months where we crunch our most of our clients allow us to anonymize their data and kind of crunch it. So we're able to actually build out statistics that can go, particularly for retention and turnover, that can go down very, very low. So low, I mean detailed. So that's something we plan on offering ourselves. But as far as compensation benchmarking and recruiting, we have a couple excellent partners we work with.
Someone would like to know, what are the standard 20 metrics?
So I will go and show you. So in recruiting, cost per hire, time to fill, job applications, requisition, source of hire. We've got financial, revenue per employee, compensation, benefits, talent, performance, professional development, succession planning, and organization, which I refer more to as demographics, just general number of employees. How many reports does a manager have? Each manager, the average manager have? What's the average number of absences, turnover, hires versus terminations in a given time period, tenure, ethnic diversity, and average age.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Last one I see here, and feel free to send more questions if you'd like. But the last one is, what is the pricing structure like?
Yeah, so we have kind of a hybrid pricing structure. So you can get in very inexpensively and price it by user. So example, if you have, you want to start with, 3 people in human resources, we can give you a price for 3 users that doesn't matter how many employees you have. Generally, when you get up to about 15 or 20 users, our price for unlimited users, which is priced by number of employees, you tend to hit a break even then, and it makes more sense rather than to buy users to just get an unlimited license, which is based on your number of employees. And that's usually when the product breaks out of HR. Usually clients will buy users. Until then, their people managers and line managers outside of HR want access to the product. And then we look at kind of a more expanded license capability.
All right. Well, outside of that, we just have the winners of the mystery movie and actors.
Let me go back to the.
And I have to apologize. Murphy's Law kicked in, and someone walked in the door right as you were saying how many people
Top
could win.
2 in each category. So the first 2 people who identified this movie as Casablanca.
All right, that would be Dawn Monteleone and Aaron Hicks.
Okay. All right, and I don't know who the guy on the far left is. He didn't have a big role, but the characters in the movie, that's Claude Rains in black, Humphrey Bogart right next to him. In between them is Paul Henreid, and that's Ingrid Bergman off to the right. So first 2 people who had 2 of those names would win that one.
All right, so they need 2 names to win. All right, so we have Dawn Hess with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman.
Okay.
And we have Denise Manfra with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman.
All right. Well, congratulations. I have a couple of old movie buffs out there like myself. So it's a classic. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend seeing it. World War II fought out in a nightclub in the rim of Africa.
Can't beat that.
All right. Well, that being the case, I would like to thank everybody for attending. And I wanted to, give me that far, but I wanted to one last thing here, just give everybody my So if you want to reach out to TrenData afterwards, well, first off, if you want to reach out to me, that's my email, tom@trendata.com. I have a Twitter at Tom McEwen, and I have a blog at tommcEwen.net. TrenData, you can reach out generically to us at marketing@trendata.com. You can follow us on Twitter at TrenData Inc. And our website is TrenData.com. We're also on Facebook and LinkedIn as well. So we post all of our content up there. So hopefully it makes its way to you, but you can always go right to the website or call one of us if you want something that's not there. So thank you very much. It's been a great, engaging session. I appreciate everybody coming along, and hope the new year for all of you is a little better than last year, a lot better. But thanks, and be safe, and we hope to hear from you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.